Hi, I'm James McGuire, Managing Editor of Datamation, and I'm here at the Digital Identity Summit with Reed Taussig, President and CEO of ThreatMetrix. Reed, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Really good.
You know, it's interesting. The Identity Summit is sold out this week. We're actually on a wait list for people to register. So I'm wondering, why do you think there's such enormous interest in digital identity and authentication these days?
Yeah, it's really very gratifying, by the way. The registration is more than 2x what it was last year. We're well over 650 people. The reason for it is digital identities themselves. They have become the new thing. A couple of years ago it was big data, Hadoop. Now it's AI. Digital identities are the next wave of innovation that people are looking to. And actually, there'll be probably 5 or 6 companies that are in attendance this week who are building their own digital identities. You may have seen that FIS and Equifax released a press release a couple of weeks ago on Only ID. This is occurring all over the world. I just got back from a world tour and met with a half a dozen corporations who are building digital IDs, who recognize the value of digital IDs, and so that's, I think, where the interest is coming from.
Interesting. It seems like there's a bit of a natural balance in the authentication sector between customers and merchants. They both want a very fast transaction online, but the merchants need to protect themselves. They need to know who they're doing business with. How does ThreatMetrix play a role in that process?
So ThreatMetrix actually provides passive authentication. We're a risk-based authentication platform, and we'll be making some announcements actually this week, which affect PSD2 and other factors within that whole ecosystem, that merchant system. But you're right. As soon as you do a step-up or out-of-band authentication, one-time password in an e-commerce transaction, you have about a 70% abandonment rate. It's not really that different in the banking world. So if I go and apply for a credit card, for example, and all of a sudden I get a one-time password, or they're asking me to do something out of the ordinary, you get a very high abandonment rate. So what customers are looking for, not only e-commerce customers, but our financial services as well as our media customers, are ways to passively authenticate that participant so that the participant is unaware of the fact that they have now been fully authenticated and that they're safe to do business with. It has to be instant, it has to be inexpensive, and it has to be completely unobtrusive to that consumer, that customer.
Well, and speaking of the customer, their privacy is actually also respected, in that their identity is not known totally. Am I correct in thinking that?
That is absolutely correct. We run a global digital identity network. There's 3.5 billion people that do business on the internet every day, and we know something about 1.4, 1.5 billion of them. So, what we're really interested in are people who are doing business on the internet. I don't really care about your kids doing homework on the internet or grandma looking at pictures of her grandkids. I care about people who are buying things on the internet, who are using it for business. We went to a fully private key encryption system and tokenization system 5 or 6 years ago from now. So really our business is, I don't need to know your name to know who you are. And in fact, I don't want to know your name. And the reason for that is all of the data privacy issues that are around the globe. There's lots of competing standards, whether it's GDPR in the EU, the US has standards, Canada, and so on. But consumers absolutely have a right to be fully protected. The internet, what you don't want to have happen, and in fact it does happen, is that the consumer, rather than becoming the consumer, becomes the product. Right. And so we want to avoid that. Yeah.
So interesting, when you're out talking with customers out in the field, what sort of pain points do you see? What sort of challenges are businesses dealing with, and how are they dealing with them?
So it depends on the industry, of course, but in all cases, globalization is a huge issue. One of the things that ThreatMetrix does and does very well is to facilitate cross-border e-commerce, for example. So a cross-border transaction, let's say that I'm in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, I want to book a hotel room in San Francisco using a South America, Brazil issued credit card. That transaction is 70% more likely to be declined than a domestic transaction. This year alone, cross-border e-commerce transactions will account for over $600 billion in business. Okay. And you have a marketplace that frankly is 30% efficient because it's 70% more likely to be declined. Right. So, once you go online, once you become an online entity as a business, you are global by definition, right, instantly, the moment that you go online. So there's a big issue there in terms of being able to deal with the opportunity, the global opportunity to attract customers if you have products and services that fit. And many people do. The other issue, I think, that is an issue that we see everywhere in the world today is just the lack of trained IT resources, available people to be able to keep up with the pace of change. This pace of change that is occurring all over the world. I mean, think about what Amazon, for example, has done to the e-commerce business, or even more so, the brick and mortar retail business. So, companies are retooling themselves. I just saw that it was Nordstrom's, I think. One of the big retailers is opening up a store here in San Francisco that will have no inventory whatsoever. It will have, it'll have one of everything, so that you can look at it, But
it's like the Amazon bookstore.
Yeah, right. That's exactly right. So if you think about this rate of change to business and the infrastructure that's sitting behind it, it's really very challenging for these companies to just keep up with that rate of change.
What about the future? A few years out, say we're having this same conversation in the year 2020. What will we be talking about in terms of digital identity and authentication several years out?
So Accenture, I'll quote Accenture, is estimating that 25% of the world's economy by 2020 will be digitally driven. So think about that.
What is the current percentage?
I think it's probably around 12 or 15%, something like that. So, it's growing at huge rates. And then what you have millennials and people in other countries, China, for example, and India, who have just skipped an entire generation of online usage and gone completely to mobile. Right. India, for example, is getting rid of their cash. They're going to go to completely electronic payments. So I think what you're going to see over the course of the next 4, 5, 6 years is a rapid transformation in the way people are paid on a global basis. So you may have seen that Alibaba is trying to buy MoneyGram here, and this whole issue of payments is a global issue. Right. That is occurring very, very rapidly and very, very interesting. In terms of identity and digital identities, I think that digital identities that are fully anonymized are going to be what is expected from consumers. There are a number of regulations that are going into effect, GDPR being on the leading edge in the UK and Europe, which in fact are going to necessitate that digital identities become the standard, and that anonymized, tokenized digital identities will be the only standard.
There's a lot of demand for that.
There's a huge demand for it because of the whole issue of the rights of privacy on that. It's a very interesting question. Germany, for example, is very aggressive in terms of protecting privacy, to the point, really, where they're doing themselves a disservice because they're simply opening the front door to the fraudsters. So the criminal fraud rates are going up dramatically in places like Germany, because they have things, for example, forget me, so that the fraudster gets online, uses a stolen credit card, and then gets back on the service and says, you need to wipe out everything that you know about me. Lack of tracking. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you need to have an intelligent, well-balanced system which protects the rights of privacy for people. We're 100% for that. But at the same time, identifies criminal intent to protect a business against these kinds of huge losses. So I think we're going to have to work this out. Governments are going to have to work this out. I think that the major internet-based economies, India, the United States, Western Europe, Japan, China, we need to come together with a set of rules and regulations that don't represent this patchwork quilt that really nobody can comply with, because the internet doesn't have any borders. You get online. I can be in China at 10 o'clock and I can be in the UK at 10:05 and whatever. So it needs to have, there needs a lot of work needs to be done at a regulatory level, government level, and also in terms of just defining what the rights of individuals are versus the rights of businesses to protect themselves. But it's going to be exciting. I mean, when you think about 25% of the world's economy is digitally based, and this is, you're only talking about 3 or 4 years from now.
Right.
That's an amazing number.
Well, Reed, we have to wrap it up, but thank you very much for talking with us, and thank you everyone for watching.
Pleasure talking to you.
Great.